Mark Watts, Elitefts.com. I'm here on the campus of Urbana University, and this is part of our Sports Performance Coach Education Series. This week, we're going to talk about training in the high school environment. Now, I'll be honest with you, I have not been a high school strength coach. I'm currently not a high school strength coach, but I've been involved in high school athletics from a recruiting standpoint and from a curriculum standpoint at different opportunities. And why am I qualified to tell you this? Well, I think I've been able to have a good relationship with a lot of colleagues that have done a tremendous job at the high school level, and hopefully some of these ideas can basically bring it home to you and help you in your situation. The thing about high school strength and conditioning is we have so much variety, so much variances with small college as well, but really in high school, from programs that are run like Division I programs and all the way to non-existent. So hopefully some of these ideas can get to you and just give you some different perspectives on things. So where did this all start? This started with basically a log post that I wrote, and where that got the inspiration from was a tweet, obviously, that's got a lot of press. And I want to make sure that people understand that obviously that this is something that the recruits that Urban Meyer had for Ohio State, and how many of them, the larger percentage, were multi-sport athletes. And obviously I know that people that know me know how much of an advocate I am for multi-sport athletes. But there's a couple things I want to make sure that people understand. This is brought up to me by some coaches. One, Thomas Newman, had brought this up. But the one thing to understand is that when you look at big time college athletes and some of the greatest athletes of all time playing multiple sports, I think you have to be objective to the fact that the reason why those athletes are so good at the sport they're playing is because they play multiple sports, or do they play multiple sports at such a high level because they're such a good athlete? And I think that's a tough question. To me, I think it doesn't matter as much to me. I think that obviously we want to encourage athletes to play as many sports as they want to, especially at an early age. You don't want your kid to burn out at age 8 and really so they start to hate the game when they're 18. We talked about that before. It goes back to that. I know that for an example, a good parallel would be when they measured the vertical jumps on Olympic lifters and how high of vertical jumps they have. And of course, that is the biggest. This is back in I think maybe 92 Olympics. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been a while. And of course, most people associate Olympic lifters have high vertical jumps because they Olympic lifts. They do the Olympic lifts, or is it because they had such high verticals because those were Olympians? They were in the Olympics, and the correlation, because they were such good athletes, they were so explosive that they had, it probably worked, it probably one helped the other. So, and I think it's the same thing when you're talking about high school athletes as well too. They're able to play multiple sports because of their ability, but playing multiple sports obviously can't help their ability. The ability to do different activities and really, without burning out and sharing the same movement patterns. So, a couple takeaways with this is, again, I just make sure don't discourage athletes from not playing multiple sports. Early specialization, people will argue against it. To me, I just think that as long as it's the athlete's decision, make sure that they're in a situation where they can play as many sports as they want to. And the dilemma is that how do we make this work? The seasons are getting longer, and athletes are, the seasons are getting longer, and there's just more there's more sports to play. That particular season's longer, but then we also have spring ball, fall ball, winter ball, all these other additional seasons in relation to the already long season. So it really doesn't get an athlete. There is no off season for a lot of these multi-sport athletes, and that's maybe one of the causation is not correlation, but that's maybe one of the reasons why these athletes are really specialized, just because they don't have time. And shame on us as coaches and administrators and facilitators that's the reason why it's happening. All right, so to me, I always thought that one of the possible solutions for this is to create an environment, and again, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but basically create an environment where athletes can continue to train year-round in season. If they're going to be in season year-round, they can train year round. And I think there's so much that is missing in terms of educating coaches on how to effectively do this. And more. I mean, you have the coaches that, that you have that'll have practice, will have lifting sessions, and the kids, they want to go and do a separate session at their private, sport performance facility. And it just adds on to it. With better communication, better education, we might be able to come up with a system that can really have the best of both worlds. Get athletes to play as much as they can and get them strong, get them more prepared, and get them playing at a higher level. Because they can train with that off-season intensity in season if it's set up correctly. So I don't know if we're going to be able to get to that whole context in this presentation, but again, just to get you thinking. So again, sport coach reservations. This is what, a lot of times as sport coach, and again, this is no knock on high school sport coaches, but sometimes, you're in a situation where, their background might not be in coaching or biomechanics or sports management. So, they might be the English teacher that wanted to coach because he loves it, and that's great. But that also means that sometimes that education has to happen more frequently. Couple things again. One of the things is they don't want their athletes to be sore. They don't want to lift weights and affect their game. If I lift, my basketball player will affect his shot, or my wrestler won't have his legs underneath him if he trains. So that's a concern. And again, can he really? Everybody, the whole misconception of can we really get stronger in season? And of course, every coach out there saying yes, but there's still some of those dinosaurs that don't believe that. We're just going to maintain, and we know that from physiological standpoint, that's not really going to happen. You're either going to get stronger or get weaker. And again, will they be fatigued? Soreness and fatigue kind of one and the same, but really, that's really, from a long-term effect, not just from that, we're lucky because they're at that age where, again, you can really push them from a central nervous system standpoint. But again, still, if the athlete's not performing at their highest level, they're going to get discouraged. They're going to point the finger at something. So that's really what the concerns are. And again, this is the most important question. Can they train in an in-season template and still develop physically? So that's one of the things that we really want to kind of look at here. So some of the obstacles when training like this is money. Again, if you really want to train, you have to hire a coach to train these athletes, and sometimes that, whether it becomes a stipend, whether it becomes some kind of a contract where you get some quality coaching and quality programming for these young people, cooperation from the sport coaches. That's really a thing that if there's still sport coaches out there that say, listen, I don't want you playing basketball because I want you concentrating on track, or I don't want you running track because you need to do the football training in the spring. If there's still coaches out there that are doing that, it's a shame. It really is. And they might not know any better. And I think that's really one thing, a paradigm that we really have to shift in the positive direction with that. Education, understanding that, listen, there's still coaches out there that don't understand that, being stronger will actually prevent injuries, or at least reduce the chance of those injuries. That's something that's our job as strength and conditioning professionals, to make sure that we're communicating that. And also, the commitment. It's not easy to get. You got to get coaches that are willing to wake up in the morning and shift class schedules and do all these things and make sure they can facilitate this training of these athletes. Because again, if they have a practice and they have a training session 2 different times, that doubles the amount of exposure, that doubles the amount of supervision they need. It's going to take commitment from the obviously the parents, from the teachers, from the coaches, and before you can even get any commitment, from the athletes. So it's very important. All right, so curriculum. This is the one thing, again, I don't want to speak out of turn or out of my expertise or out of my scope of practice, but it's one thing that I think physical education has gotten a bad rap. And I think, talking to, Gary Schofield, one of the things to talk about is because we've left the physical in, we've taken the education out of physical education. And I think that's one of the things that's really disturbing. So, for me, I think when you're talking about from that curriculum from the ground up, obviously I think we're all in agreement that, again, when you're talking about motor learning, you're talking about learning about sportsmanship, not just, from learning the different games and learning how to be a teammate. Those are things that need to be taught. And I think it's probably one of the most, being a good teammate might be the best lesson that any child could have. Above anything else when they're coming as far as for future success. And again, teaching them self-confidence and self-worth, teaching them that they matter, teaching them how to feel good about what they can do. All those things need to be addressed in elementary education. And I wrote about this before, but sometimes you go to these elementary gymnasiums and it's a hardwood floor with 10-foot basketball hoops. And there's nothing against basketball. People think I hate basketball. No, I'm just saying sometimes, should that look more conducive to a gymnastics facility where they can tumble, they can roll, they can crawl, they can skip, they can jump, they can do all these different things. All of a sudden now we equate getting better for sport as dropping them off at a sports performance place and making them deadlift, as opposed to getting those movement patterns that they can build on for the future. So just basically getting as many, and it comes to a budget thing, but getting as many different tools to help those young people learn and appreciate physical development and movement is really important. At the middle school, this is that awkward age where, again, to have co-ed at this age is kind of, it just gets in the way. And really, I think that because of so much social pressures on these young people at that age, once they hit that puberty, it just really compounds things when they're in front of their peers and they're need to do some physical activity, which maybe they're not used to. So this is a time really that you need to start to really, for lack of a better word, specialize in different, and continue on the path, but at the same time get them in a situation where they can learn that I can do some things. And that's the transition between self-confidence and self-confidence and really and skill development, and turn that into self-efficacy where they know that they can, if they needed to do a certain physical activity, they can do that, and that starts to build. And once they get to the high school level, it doesn't make any sense to have an athlete that plays soccer, basketball, and softball, and all of a sudden now she has to do a gym class where she has to do relay races and whatnot. I think her physical development is being addressed. So some schools are in a position where they can make that, is that a sports performance type training block that they can do to help them on their sport, or does playing a sport replace physical education? I understand the timing and the budget and whatnot, but I think that, obviously if we can use that timing in that class period for athletes to be able to, get better at their sport and keep them safer, I think in the long run it's going to be better for everybody. So just think about that curriculum a little differently is important. All right, so scheduling, obviously, I always said that the best times to train an athlete, at a separate session before practice, a couple hours before, so they get maybe one or at least two meals in beforehand, right before practice or right after practice. And I think sometimes at the high school, because of the schedule is more structured than, say, a college environment, sometimes it's a little more difficult. So, and again, for me, the best time is if you have the ability to have class times to address, sports performance training, strength training, during phys ed, and to be able to tailor that to help those athletes, we're not one rep max testing on the bench press just so we can have some standards so we can actually give grades for these kids, but really have an actual structured program to help them in the long run, develop, as an athlete. Obviously, in season, trying to train in the morning. And again, this is going to be, does an athlete want to wake up in the morning to train before school and then be able to, have to practice later on that evening? It does two things. Number one, it gives the athletes more time to recover between the training session and the practice. Number two, it frees up those weight room times for the off-season sports. The athletes that aren't playing right now that can go in and really try to develop physically, in the off-season. Can you do that? Can you just throw them in there to do a quick circuit after practice? Sure. I guess it won't hurt them, but at the same time, it's really not training. You're just checking boxes at that point. So that's kind of I've seen this work at a couple places, and it does take a buy-in, but so does everything. So I think in the long run, that's the one thing, and that comes back to that cooperation with the whole school. So we're looking at, this is a basic template again. This will be something for, say, if you have basketball that plays Tuesdays, Friday nights. I understand there's going to be some fluctuation in schedules, but this would be something that of a suggestion, so that you go with on days that you have practice, again, you'll lift in the mornings. Game days, you just won't lift. And then again, Saturdays, maybe you do films and lift in the morning. It doesn't have to be actually in the afternoon, but something like this schedule here makes a lot of sense. Now, when you're looking at it, again, how many, can you train the day before a game and still perform at a very high level for that game? Some people would disagree because of the high-low sequencing system or whatnot. To me, I think at that high school level, if I don't think it's realistic to have an athlete, train, after the game or one time a week. And I think we got the paradigm shifted a little bit. I think that, a 3-day week program is plenty. I think sometimes in season we try to train less, and off season we try to train more. And sometimes if we kind of switch that, we can probably, from a logistical standpoint, get some more work done. And I'll explain to you what we're talking about. So again, a 3-day in season, this would be that same thing, excluding that Saturday we talked about. But again, if they have a game on a Tuesday and a game on a Friday, Wednesday, because you're 2 days before a game, maybe that's your day. At the college level, they had games on Wednesday, Saturday. So that was even easier because we would get after it on Monday and a Thursday. 2 days a week, so you had 2 days off. But, obviously trying to get those athletes at a different time than their practice, they would just get more out of the lift. A 2-hour practice is going to inhibit a 35-minute training session more than a 35-minute training session would inhibit a 2-hour practice. And everybody that has any idea about biomotor abilities and energy systems understand that. So that would be one of those things. Again, day before a game would be more explosive movements, low volume, and again, didn't even put sets and reps here because that's another presentation as itself. And again, the day that we're doing more low bar specific stuff will be this day. Can you throw in a press on this day? Absolutely. That's one thing too that you have it up there. But again, I think training the 3 days a week in the morning, separate from practice, is going to be better than maybe 1 day a week. In addition to practice in the afternoon. So, all right. So we talked about curriculum, we talked about scheduling, now we'll talk about systems. And we'll go over this very briefly, and it won't be as comprehensive maybe as I like, but at least you'll get an idea. So we talk about systems. What we're looking at is, again, a school-wide methodology, and I think that's always that's why BFS has always had success, because no matter what sport those athletes were playing, no matter what they were doing, everybody was on the same page, and the terminology meant the same, regardless of what season you're in or regardless of what sport you're playing on, or playing in. So again, 2-day week programming. I think one thing is that coaches cannot be afraid, of training 2 days a week, thinking you can get very strong on 2 days a week training. And from a scheduling standpoint, it might be the most beneficial for you to go with a 2-day week training, because then you can always add in an additional speed day. You can add in an additional conditioning day, an additional body weight circuit day, whatever it may be, if you have that programming down to 2 days. At least if you have someone miss, they have basically 5 days that week to get those 2 training sessions in, and then you can add different workouts from there. Is it optimal? Probably not, but at least I think you cannot allow that to be an excuse. And again, especially if you have athletes, you have some sports going Monday, Wednesday, Friday, some sports going Tuesday, Thursday, maybe they flip-flop. But you have to be able to have confidence that you're good enough strength coach to get people stronger in 2 days a week. Speed training in large group on different days, I've done it before. Again, it goes back to the optimum thing, but at least now you have everybody in one setting, and you can get everybody taken care of. And again, the way we did our speed training was pretty simple. We'd make the kids race and do some different patterns, and just make sure they were fully recovered in between, and try to do that as much as possible and coach them on technique and positioning the best we could. And again, I think it's a little bit more, anytime that a speed training session takes your best coach out of the weight room, I think that's a tough thing. So, even if you're Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and all speed on Tuesday, Thursday, not great either, but at least you have something that you're addressing there. And again, stagger your starts. That's really, that's, I think, the biggest obstacle that a lot of coaches have is that, okay, school's over at this time. School's over at 2:50. Every sport is in a weight room at 3:15. And again, it's almost, it's almost offensive to say, listen, this team, you're coming in at 4:15. And again, that just, for some reason, coaches have not and schools have not really bought into that programming at this point. And it's just a safer, it provides a safer environment. And again, hopefully there's some more schools that are getting into that system where say, okay, we're going to stagger a little bit, have your weight room set up where you can have athletes doing the mobility work while another team's on the platforms and another team or in the racks and another team is finishing up with, some hypertrophy circuits, and make sure that rotates through. And that way, again, if you're organized and you get athletes with their time on task, you can have it done. And again, complexes and circuits, talk about that as well too. So that's something that really, and again, if you don't have to quantify the movement, empower them to get the work done in some kind of circuit fashion. It's not really the end of the world. Here's a two-day split. We're talking about movements, and again, we used to just do. Again, for me, I think the best way to split it up is that if you have your triple extension, which would include any kind of your active method type stuff, plus any kind of your rotation stuff, you can get to the position where, you have that, movement at those explosive movements at the beginning. Then really we split up into four different movements for upper and lower. Lower body would be double leg push, double leg pull, single leg push, single leg pull. Upper body, vertical push, vertical pull, horizontal push, horizontal pull. And again, what exercises you put in there, it just depends. The reason why we did with this setup, where we do a vertical push and a vertical push, double leg push, horizontal pull with a vertical push, it was just opposite. You don't have to do it that way. The biggest reason was because most of the time, if we were in the rack, we could actually get in an overhead press and a squat without actually changing any of the weight where the bar is set up. We can do a couple things all at once. So that was one of the main reasons. But you could set that any way you want to. But you're addressing all the basic movement patterns. If you're looking at the exercise pool, obviously this is something that, going all the way back to looking at Joe Ken's tier system, creating an exercise pool. And this will be dependent on the facility you have, the equipment you have, the athlete you're training, the time of year that you're training them. So again, not everybody, for example, for a squat, will be doing a front box and back squat, right? Some athletes that are more advanced, I was a big bands and chains guy. You can, with that double leg pull, that trap bar deadlift can move into that double leg push if you have other activities you want. Same thing with an incline press. Can you put it into vertical press or horizontal press? I don't think it matters, just as long as it's appropriate for, you put it somewhere so you have some kind of rotation. Maybe for all your freshman athletes that are in season, they're all doing dumbbell goblet squat, whatever. That's going to be up to you. But again, you basically put those, whatever exercise you want, and make sure before you implement that in your programming that your athletes are proficient at them. So a 2-day split now with that same setup would be basically, again, this is dynamic effort, sub-max, circa max, whatever. We have effort and emphasis lifts and really some supplemental and accessory lifts. But for the most part, again, that's just an example how we set that up with the programming. So, and again, if it's equipment based, one of the best things I did when my last year at Denison, at 4:30 on Tuesday, Thursdays, we had 7 teams in the weight room. And 7 full teams, and they were staggered maybe a little bit, but really we had a lot of interns and we did the best job we could to get those teams in and out. We had some of those teams were in season, but the 5 teams that are off season, we had this schedule. So really with that same movement pattern we talked about, right? Day 1 being triple extension, vertical push, double leg push, horizontal row, and a single leg pull. That was, we would basically have a barbell version of that and a dumbbell version of that. And so there's an example here where, again, barbell 1, barbell 2, we have those different movements just all on barbells. And then with a dumbbell, we would have, a dumbbell workout. This would be very similar to barbell 1. And then for our kettlebell workout, this was similar to barbell 2. Now you could do both of these. You could actually do a dumbbell 2 workout as well too. So you can kind of come up with what you want. But what it did was it kept the athletes in one area. So again, we have the racks on one side of the room. We had the kettlebell set up on one corner. We had the dumbbell set up on the other side of the room. So that way the athletes were able to go through. And I talked about some of the ways you can set up kettlebells and dumbbells to get more athletes working harder at one time in a previous webinar. But that's one of the main things that we were able to do is all of a sudden now you don't have that movement. Now instead of, if we were fortunate to have 12 to 16 racks, we could get a lot more athletes working because, we can get, an athlete doing entire work on a dumbbell. So really, it's just kind of that rotation where they would do a dumbbell workout one every 4 workouts. They were able to still address some of those same movements, even if it was just with a different implement. So just being creative that way, really simple thing to do. And again, at that age, that may be what they need, especially if you're working with in-season athletes. You may be able to just cut it down to the top 3 and then still be able to work it that way. So in summary, just to finish this up, I know this didn't give you a lot of concrete things, but again, just the takeaways for training at the high school level. It's going to take a lot of work to try to change this mindset and change the culture of what you have. But again, there might be a better way than what you're doing. If you have the facilities to do it, if you have the class schedule where everybody can strength train during school hours, that's great. Not everybody's in that same situation. So a couple things. Again, we need to basically, a couple E's here. Number one, encourage your athletes to play multiple sports. Don't discourage them. I'm not saying you have to say, hey, listen, you're really good at this. You should try that. I'm just saying, don't discourage, if anything. Don't discourage, and don't. Again, a lot of times, the way their perception is on when an athlete says, "I'm going to try this in my senior year. I'm going to try doing this sport." You know what? That might be the most fun they ever have playing a sport, because if you have an athlete that tries to play another sport that they've never played before, and they're a good enough athlete to do so, they're probably going to have the time of their life because there's no pressure. I'm the best basketball player in the state, but I'm going to play lacrosse this spring because it's fun. It's fun, and I really like these girls I'm playing with. That's maybe a crude example, but really don't discourage that, if anything. Educate coaches. That's really on training. That's the one thing that we have to do. And sometimes there might be a building full of teachers, and not one of them knows really some of the, have all the answers. And that's why I think it's important that we continue to educate coaches on the best way to train and see how other people are doing it, because again, there are better ways. Because if they don't get it from you, they're going to get it from another source. They're going to get it from the kid who got that from who knows where, as far as how to train during high school. So, and again, a lot of people are always more and better. Private facility guys, you have someone like David Allen who would turn a kid away and say, listen, you're not training today because I don't want your money. I want you to recover for your game. It's harder to find sports performance coaches like some of the guys that I'm fortunate enough to know. So guys like Nick Showman and J.L. Holdsworth and Anthony Donskoff, and a lot of these guys that have these private facilities that understand the whole development of the athlete. Don't expect that everybody's going to be like that. And again, expect improved performance. It's everybody. Every strength coach knows if your athletes train hard during the season, and they have enough recovery because of the volume is low, the intensity is appropriate, and they're doing the movements correctly, everyone knows. It's not a question of if they're going to get better. They're going to get better. And again, having those expectations where we are going to be stronger during sectionals, during states than we were at the beginning of the season, that is the expectations that you're going to have as a coach. Your athletes will start to have those expectations too, right? Stuff you didn't agree with, please make sure that you comment on this article, www.elitefts.com, and really it's going to be /category/education, and again, to get to this article, but really, hopefully we can get some more talk, and if you have some ideas that have worked for you at the high school level, please don't keep them to yourself, share them, and and again, let's make sure that we keep the communication open. So again, make sure you visit elitefts.com for all your strength and conditioning needs, and we'll see you next time.